Start today's video by looking at the squatting pattern. This will include the unweighted squat, goblet squat, the front squat, the back squat with a high bar like an Olympic lifter would do, back squat with a low bar like a powerlifter might do, and also the overhead squat, which is a great movement for working on alignment and teaching your body to contract as one piece. We'll cover the field. Not everyone needs to do all of these different variations. Don't get too sucked in. I'm putting a lot of information out there, but you could work on any one of these for a very long time. Cool, so we're starting here with the squat. I'm taking quite a wide stance just to start me off. Notice the knees collapse. We want to avoid that, keep them out. So I've gone down with an imaginary sack of potatoes and then moved into prayer stretch. You don't want the knees to collapse, so that'll involve your glutes. Come down with the potato sack, keep the knees out, reach the hands forward and then up overhead, and then stand. Just go down and up a couple of times. Just showing the motion there from the front. You can see the knees don't collapse in. All right, now from the side. Nice flat back. Try not to round at the bottom. I push my knees apart, keep my knees apart, reach up overhead and stand. Controlling back down, keeping the back nice and flat, dropping nice and low. I don't want my knees to collapse in. I'm keeping them out. I'm not collapsing through my back. I'm not collapsing forward, or collapsing, losing my arches, letting my heels come off the ground and tipping forward. Keeping my knees out, reaching up and over, and standing up. That is the warm-up for the unweighted squat. Now we have the goblet squat. Holding the weight at about chest height, as if it's a goblet or a chalice that we drink out of. And then the elbows will come in between the knees as we travel down, just brushing the inside of the knees at the bottom, making contact so you've got the guideline there. The reason we open up through the hips like that is to do with the shape of the hip. We essentially get the pelvis to drop in between the legs at the bottom rather than folding over the top. So nice and controlled on the way down and then accelerating on the way up for our goblet squat. With my teenage boys that I train at Melbourne High School, I get them to use this 40 kilo dumbbell and I make them do 12 repetitions with the 40 kilo dumbbell before I allow them to even touch a barbell for back squatting or front squatting or whatever other squat variation they want. This way I'm sure that they know how to keep their abs nice and tight, they know how to keep their back nice and flat, and they're not about to collapse and get squished. Here we have the front squat. Now some people will be a bit tight through the forearms. We want to stretch out the forearm a little bit so you can get comfy with that position. People have trouble getting their fingers on initially. They might collapse in, but I prefer not to do the arms crossed over version you'll see bodybuilders do. We want to have our fingers on the bar, elbows nice and high, shoulders will have to externally rotate to get into that position. Nice and smooth, big chest, tight belly. Backed it out of the rack, get my feet set before I squat, controlling down and accelerating up. Controlling down, accelerating up. Keeping my belly tight so my back doesn't round at the bottom. Try not to round, move a little bit on that last one. And making sure we walk into the rack before we put it down. Don't put it down on one side and find that you end up collapsing and hurting yourself. That's the front squat. And for the back squat, everything else is quite similar apart from the placement through the upper back, obviously where the barbell is. We want to squeeze the wrists nice and flat to get a stretch through the pecs, squeeze back in between the shoulder blades, and control down, accelerate up. A little bit tight, control and accelerate. Really opening up through the hips still, abs are nice and tight. A lot of tension in the upper back there to stop the chest from collapsing. Now I'm demonstrating here the low bar back squat. This lower bar position is used by powerlifters to shorten the lever, make your back a little bit shorter. They'll tend to push the hips back. I maybe exaggerated too much there, turned it into a good morning. They'll push the hips back, that one's a bit better. Really load up the hips. It's all about glutes and hamstrings because these guys are worried about lifting as much weight as possible. I still find this is a useful movement for the general public sometimes because they can benefit from a bit more hip involvement. Occasionally, particularly tall, skinny guys can benefit from a low bar back squat. So I still use it with the general population, even people who aren't competing in powerlifting. Now we see the overhead squat. I'm keeping the elbows straight, locked out. I'm not letting my ribs pop up or my bum poke out, so my abs stay on nice and strong. Controlling down and then driving back up. Controlling down and then driving back up. This is a good one to teach you how to be one piece between your hips and your arms. You don't want to lose too much motion with any floppiness. If your abs are lax or your shoulders aren't bracing properly, the bar will move out of place. I'm going to show you a few variations. First off, this is a terrible quarter squat good morning thing. This is what you see a lot of people doing in the gym. Don't do this. We want to place the feet. Also, don't rotate, all right? If you find something like this is happening, go back, do some stretching, do some one-legged work, and then tidy it up a bit. Don't let the knees collapse in on the way up. That's a really common fault. People with loose backs letting their knees collapse in. People with loose hips letting their knees collapse in as well. Also, we don't need to take a crazy wide grip. We don't want to turn it into a full-on good morning like that one there. We want the hips to descend. Whoop! We don't want the hips to come up first. That's another problem. We come down nicely, but we pop up bum first. We're not trying to dance in a video clip. We're trying to do some squats. I'll show you one last variation, and this is another kind of powerliftery tool. I find it can be handy for really teaching people how to sit back into their hips. I maybe turn that into a bit of a good morning again, but see the next one's a bit better. That's good. Sitting right back into the hips, having a target back behind you so you feel safe. People with weak glutes sometimes don't feel safe really sitting back and loading the posterior chain. So having something to sit onto can be a useful one for teaching them that. That's another fault that often happens is people collapse through the knees at the bottom of their squat. Allow their knees to shoot way forward and bounce off the ligaments. Not necessarily a great idea if you want to have happy, healthy knees.